Hey, it's Mike Brennan, and yes, we're at the end of the year, and yes, I'm wearing red, but it's Christmas red for Santa Claus. I've even got a white beard here, too. And so what we're doing is capturing, with the dynamic duo of Richard Stiennon and Dan Lohrmann. I don't know which one's Batman and which one's Robin. They have to work that out. But there are cybersecurity pros, and they're going to be talking about the year-end wrap-up, what was really big news in the cybersecurity world this year. And so let's start with some of Richard's points now. And I don't know how to pronounce that. Russian users report. How's that pronounced?
Black Basta.
Oh, thank you. Outages and amid alleged Ukrainian cyber attacks.
Yep, Gazprom.
All right, go ahead and go into that. What's that all about?
Yeah, so Gazprom is the number 3 bank in Russia, and the Alpha Bank is the number 1, and we've heard about that a lot, especially during the 2016 election, I think. And they, had their own issues a couple months ago, but now Gazprom's been targeted. Basically, a DDoS attack claimed by Ukrainian military.
Really?
Yeah. So they're saying, hey, we took down the bank, and then the bank's reporting outages for its, tens of thousands of its customers. Just people not able to get access to their accounts.
For their rubles, yeah.
For their rubles, yeah, which are worth, about 10% less every week.
Yeah, the Russian economy, that's a whole other story we won't go into. So, Matt, any questions?
Well, I'm just curious about, basically how, an institution that big gets hit. I guess the Ukrainian guys must be really good, or I mean, how does something like that happen? I mean, they're the number one. They're obviously a huge gas utility that also runs a bank.
Yeah, it doesn't take that sophisticated an attack, and in this case, if it was DDoS, those are almost possible to be completely protected against. Because the attackers just throw so many packets at the target that they just make it unavailable to the regular users. But any other way, getting in via spam emails that link to malicious sites and infect the first user and grant access that way. So that's the thing, the repeated theme through all these attacks. There's so many ways that work that it's really hard to say, hey, if we only fix this vulnerability, then we wouldn't have any problems, because the attackers just move on to the next one.
Your thoughts there, Mr. Lohrmann?
Yeah, I mean, it's Richard's the expert on this story, because we were talking a lot about the attack on telecoms and how that's hitting. So I mean, we can jump over there, but no, I don't have a whole lot to add to what Richard said on that. I mean, there's plenty of other topics that, as you know, I've just published a blog last Sunday on the top stories of this year. I don't know if you want to dive into that yet, or you want to just talk.
Well, let's do the next one, and then we'll reserve a lot of time for your discussion. So,
okay, great.
This one almost broke my heart to find out that Stoli is going down in the United States. How can we have this happen? We can't have this happen. That's my favorite vodka,
Is it really? Oh my gosh. You'll have to switch.
I'll have to, go with Grey Goose or something after this.
Tito's is pretty good.
Yeah, I had that at a holiday party the other day. And, they were really pouring real men's drinks. It was like, holy cow. So... But anyway, Stoli, what's up with that? What's happening?
Tito's is American, so you
that's true.
Tito's. Okay, so Stoli's was, founded, and you might remember this way back in the 80s or the 70s, and a Russian oligarch, Stolichnaya, but he's pro-Ukraine and anti-Putin. So he's had a lot of issues, right? Lawsuits on the brand name and stuff like that. He changed the company name to Stoli Group. The vodka is actually made in Latvia, so that's okay. You're not drinking Russian crap.
Oh yeah, it was them commies. I wouldn't want to drink it,
That's right. That's right. So, but anyways, they suffered a sophisticated ransomware attack that involved email bombing, woohoo, which is just spam. And the attackers got in and basically disrupted all of their financial systems. They've been dealing with it since last summer. They are telling stockholders they won't have it cleaned up until the first quarter of 2025.
Wow.
And the community is going to say, "Hey, finally, a cyber attack caused the company to file for bankruptcy." I think is more the legal issues they're having, protecting their brand against Russian lawsuits and whatever pressure Putin brings to bear on them. But great excuse, right? It's like, oh, we're having trouble. You can use it's the modern day, the dog ate my homework kind of thing. So that's what's going on with Stoli. So if it is your favorite, get a lifetime supply now.
It's time to make a change, apparently. Yeah, I'm forced upon me on these holiday season, because next week I go into holiday mode where copious amounts of adult beverages are consumed. So, other one you got on your list is telecom giant BT Group hit by Black Basta ransomware.
Yeah.
Terms I have not heard of before, but go ahead. So
another group, and maybe this ties into everything else in the telecom world that we're seeing that is one of the bigger events of the year. But in this case, it was British Telecom's conferencing service that went down, and evidently they may have lost tens of thousands of records as well. But it seems to be a typical criminal gang, unlike the White House announcing just this last week that 8 major telecom providers here in the U.S. have been breached by the Chinese. And I want to tell a story if we've got time.
I'd like Dan to comment on that too, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll introduce the whole concept here. Telephone companies run big switches, right? In the old days, they had copper pairs coming into them, and you saw those in your house. And if you saw one of the little utility boxes on the street, they're still full of copper pairs. But in the telecom company's central office were big switches, quite often provided by Ericom, but could be from Cisco or any of those guys. The powers that be, in the old days, when they wanted to tap into a miscreant's telephone line, they would literally use little alligator clips and go to either the central office or that box on your street, and they'd just bridge across them, and then they could hear all the conversations on that telephone line. In all the movies of spies tapping lines in the old days, that's exactly what they're doing. Well, now we go digital, and you can't do that anymore. And so the switch vendors got together with law enforcement and said, "Hey, you know what? We're going to build in a feature. So if you present a warrant to your telecom provider, you can tap anybody's phone, be it cell phone or whatever." So that's built in to every switch manufactured. Well, now we're going to go back to Athens, Greece in 2004, the Summer Olympics. And Vodafone is the telecom provider for Greece, and they buy Ericsson switches. And the Ericsson switches do have lawful intercept capability, except that there is no legal vehicle in Greece to tap people's phones. It's Europe, right? They're more privacy concerned with the individual. Well, attackers, through software updates, so you might have heard me tell this story before in relationship to SolarWinds, but through software updates, basically managed to turn on lawful intercept so that they could get access to it, and they spied on telephone conversations of 100 individuals dealing with the Summer Olympics, so officials, athletes, etc. And a couple things make you think of Russia, right? Russia always gets involved with the Olympics. They don't like that they're sanctioned all the time for doping their athletes.
They got to stop doping their athletes, and it wouldn't be a problem. But
exactly. But they always have these issues, right? And they send in athletes that obviously are just obviously pumped up. So that points to Russia as being the instigator here for some reason. But then the engineer who was in charge of installing those software updates was found dead in his apartment, hanging from a pipe.
He didn't fly through the window from 6 floors up. That's usually the typical Russian mafia.
He was probably on the second floor. So,
Okay.
So they had to hang him.
Yeah.
Better than, dismembering him and putting him inside a bag and zipping it closed, which the Russians have been known to do as well. And then the local news says it was a suicide.
Of course.
So now we know, yes, lawful intercept, and that's exactly what the Chinese are doing in practically every telecom provider in the United States. The White House has said they're not confident that the phone companies have gotten them out. Yep. So be aware, your conversations, even though we all kind of assume they're always listened to all the time, it's not actually the case. The NSA is not allowed to do that, as Dan can tell us, in the United States. But right now, there's a high likelihood that the Chinese are. So if you are a government official, somebody that the Chinese would be interested in, you should switch over to all encrypted telecommunications. So use Signal on your phone, for instance.
Like a vice president at Presidio, I'll bet they're tapping his phone, right, Dan?
They're all over him.
Well, Richard did a great job with that topic because you said a number of things I was going to say. Ann Newberger came out and said that we're not confident that they said at least 8, which is the biggest 8 telecom providers, have this issue. A high number of articles out there right now as we speak in near the end here of December, saying do exactly what Richard just said. Go out and make sure you're using end-to-end encryption. A couple other things I would just add to that, just came out, I guess it was, December 7th. So the U.S. House of Representatives is voting on $3 billion for U.S. telecom companies to remove equipment made by Chinese telecom Huawei and ZTE from American wireless networks to address security risks. That's like, why all of a sudden, in a lame duck session of Congress, $3 billion to do this on December 7th? Obviously, in the closed door sessions of Congress, talking about this threat. I guess I'm editorializing here a little bit, but I'm sure they're like, we can't do anything. It's going to cost us $3 billion to replace all this equipment. I don't know what all they did or didn't do. But it's just interesting that they're voting on this now, and I suspect that if they're voting on this right now, that Biden's going to sign it before Christmas. So it's just interesting. We've talked about Huawei on this show before. We've talked about ZTE. We've talked about Chinese telecom providers.
But notice all the hacked equipment that accounts for Chinese hacking right now is not Chinese equipment. And the Wi-Fi, the wireless stuff, that's not implicated in any of this, right? It's the
why are they? I guess my question is, why is that the lead story in Reuters, and why are they voting on it now? I mean, that's a really,
I don't know.
There's something more to this story.
DC is a mysterious place to me. They don't do anything logical there. So, Matt, what are your thoughts? Well, I know you got questions. Go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering how this came up all of a sudden. Either it's one of those mysterious things where things happen in Congress, all of a sudden they gain their own momentum, whether they make any sense or not, or is it possible they know something we don't?
Oh, come on. Don't give them all that credit.
Oh, no, they're not that smart. Trust me.
This is Saturday. So. They pass a bill or vote on a bill on a Saturday. It means and obviously none of the channel news networks work anymore on the weekends. Right, they didn't want anybody talking about this because it's just a kickback to the telecom providers. Here's $3 billion, maybe $100 million will go to buying new equipment. I can tell you Huawei and ZTE have had very, very little footprint in the United States. Remember when there used to be a telephone company, now I'm forgetting their name. They got absorbed by T-Mobile or something. They wanted
Sprint?
To use,
I think it was Sprint, wasn't it?
Sprint, right.
Yeah.
Sprint wanted to use Huawei gear because it was 20% the cost of Cisco gear, and because it was stolen Cisco gear, obviously.
Yeah, well, bootleg, right? Yeah,
it's bootleg. But anyways, they were not allowed to do that. That deal was blocked, and that's been the case for over a decade now. We don't have a lot of Chinese telecom equipment, so I'm very, very suspicious of this $3 billion.
All right, so Dan has to watch what he says because the Chinese are on him, like, white on rice, right? So, okay, then I was saving the best for last. I'm going to read the headline and let the shock effect set in after I read it here. Whereas, let me pull this up. Here it is. This is from Dan's column, which I think you're going to. Has it already been published? I guess it has, right?
It was published, on the 16th of December.
Okay.
Yeah.
2024 Cyber Review. Trump reelection eclipses artificial intelligence in ransomware stories. Take it away, Dan. Defend that headline.
Absolutely. So, I mean, clearly there's a lot of big incidents, and I lay them out in items 2 through 5 and back all them up in the blog. But why the Trump reelection and why is that the top story in my opinion? First of all, I want to kind of preface this by saying when I do my year-end story, and I've been doing this for about 10 years now, what's the top story for the year for cyber? It's in the lens of when we look back 10 years from now. So fast forward a decade and say, I remember back in 2024, we were talking about this as if what would the top story for 2014 be? So, I mean, we go back 10 years. What are people going to say was the top story for that year? And I lay out, what it was in 19. It was state and local government ransomware attacks, COVID, and hit in 2020, but it also caused a cyber pandemic, which that was all about people moving, to home, moving, so quickly, teleworking and all of that. Talking about the Ukraine war was one. Talking about other topics, in the previous years. So this year, clearly leading in number one, there's kind of two big parts of this. The first is a minor part of it, but I mentioned it in the blog that. With all this talk about lead up to the election, election security was something we've been talking about in this show and other shows. Will it be a safe election? Will the election be hacked? I mean, there were some prognosticators that were saying this will be the last election we ever have in America because it's all going to be XYZ, all these things were going to happen. And obviously none of that happened. And yeah, we had disinformation and misinformation. We had some, machines that somebody said some punch card somewhere didn't do something. But the reality is, in the grand scheme of things, I think Richard would agree with me on this, we would not call this the great hack of 2024 election. I mean, most people believe that the election went pretty smoothly and the outcome was fairly clear and there weren't riots in the streets and there's nobody, complaining about the mechanics of how the election went in 2024. So that's kind of a preface to the bigger topic. That in and of itself wouldn't make this the number one thing. But I mean, I think the fact that Trump won and the fact that we're going to see such dramatic change in the cyber, and obviously a lot of that's not going to take effect until January. But as I mentioned in there, the stock market isn't waiting for that. I mean, if you just look at what's happened in the last month and anticipating what's going to happen with regulations, all the talk about Doge, which is a convenient name. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts around, Department of Government Efficiency and how it links up with Elon
Sounds like an
Musk's,
oxymoron, doesn't it? But go ahead. So,
the cuts that are coming, and I list 10 reasons here. I think there's probably another 20, but I'll just run through them real quickly for the audience. Dramatic changes in leadership are coming for federal government in numerous agencies. Really across the board, we're going to see a complete change. As described in the governing magazine, talking about Trump will largely deregulate approach to tech while aiming to aggressively pursue foreign cyber threat actors. Expect major tech and cyber policies to change as never before in the federal government. I believe we're going to see an overhaul unlike anything we've seen in the last several decades. Ukraine approach under Trump will be overhauled, including U.S. aid and cyber impacts. So all those talks we've had and all the things about cyber, if you believe it'll really change, I believe it will, and it's already happening now. You could say it's good or bad, or are we caving into Putin? You could argue all those kinds of things, but I think clearly I believe Trump's approach to Ukraine is going to be very different than Biden's was, and that's also going to include cyber impacts to that as well. There's going to be, clearly cyber is a smaller story than the overall war, but if you're going to talk about Ukraine cyber, you got to talk about the war overall. Russia and China cyber strategies will dramatically change under Trump 2.0. Incoming Trump administration is unlikely to continue some elements of President Biden's national cybersecurity strategy. So if you look at the national strategy for cybersecurity to have today, I think it's going to be overhauled. That's a story by Brookings, by the way. That wasn't my story. They lay out all the changes that the Trump administration is going to impact, where they're going to agree with Biden and where they're going to disagree with Biden. Data privacy policies will change. Approach to crypto will change under Trump. Leadership on AI and other new tech topics will change under Trump. And we could dive into some of the details behind that. Two more budget cuts under DOGE will make new security priorities clear very quickly. I think it's a lot of the focus is going to be going away from government and pushing more into the private sector. Things like reporting. A lot of the things we've talked about in this program may in fact be undone. Like, how quickly do you have to report an incident to the federal government, to the FBI, to others? What will those requirements be? And then lastly, state and local governments as well as critical infrastructure sectors will be impacted by Trump's new approach to cybersecurity. It'll be far different than Biden's. So I'm basically saying that 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back at this and we're going to say there was a 90-degree turn. I'm not going to say it was 180 degrees. I think that would be too much. But I think we're going to see a dramatic change in the approach to cybersecurity. And that's why I believe him winning is the top cyber story 10 years from now when we look back at 2024.
Why don't you ask your questions, then we'll go to Richard.
All right. I'm just wondering how much of what Trump has proposed to do. I mean, he already in that NBC News interview said, well, we can't really do much about grocery prices. And then he kind of blew off a question about trans athletes, and he kind of blew off a whole bunch of things that he campaigned on. And I'm just wondering how much of these cuts will actually happen. The policy changes, I could see that happening because that's something he can do without any congressional approval whatsoever. But I really do wonder about some of the cuts because you're going to have, if he comes after Social Security and Medicare in a serious way, I mean, you're going to have.
That would be the third rail. The 2026 elections will be a bloodbath for red,
Yeah,
so.
I would agree. But I agree with you on the policy changes that he's able to implement, administratively rather than legislatively.
And I'm not predicting Social Security or Medicare is going to change dramatically. He's actually said publicly he's not going to do that, and I'm not saying that he's. But well, we'll have to really see. Elon Musk says $2 billion out of the federal budget. I think that's very high. I don't believe it.
Well, the entire discretionary
trillion actually
1.7. Yeah, right.
Oh, $2 trillion. I'm sorry, $2 trillion.
Yeah,
$2 billion would be what he gets for lunch every day or something, So, Richard, what's your thoughts?
Shaking out of his couch. Yeah.
Yes, right. Yeah.
I kind of I agree that it's going to be difficult for rapid and massive changes across the board, right? Because every executive coming in wants all these changes, and they've got about 100 days to initiate something, and then it's too late. Now they got to worry about the midterms. And I definitely think the only thing the Trump administration is capable of doing is causing chaos, and possibly, if a few of his appointments get through for cabinet level, then maybe they will start moving, the centers of all these agencies outside of DC. That'll cause.
Well, the FBI building is going to become a museum to the dark state or whatever, deep state or something like that.
Yeah. But I do wonder.
I mean, don't get me started. I want to stay out of the politics of it. It's just like,
I'm trying to stay out of the politics too, guys.
Yeah, we're both trying. I'm wondering if CISA, which somebody reminded me the other day, was actually created under the first Trump administration, which I think was something that was just the ball was rolling and he didn't have his hands on the levers of government by the time it was created, and he didn't like Chris Krebs, ultimately saying that the 2020 election wasn't stolen, but he did say
it wasn't under Obama. Are you sure about that, Richard? I have to go back and look that up.
Yeah, I went back and looked at it. It was stood up in like 2017 or something like that.
Well, so that would be the first Trump years. Yeah,
it was probably Obama who had put it in place, and then it happened during. But anyways, the question for you, Dan, is: do you suspect CISA to be dismantled?
I mean, there are definitely Republicans, Rand Paul being one of them, who thinks it should be. I doubt that. I mean, honestly, I'm trying to look at this from an optimistic perspective. I do agree that not all of it's going to happen. Um, I think that personally, my view is they're going to come in a lot more organized than they were the first time. He knows he's got probably, like as you mentioned, Mike, 2 years, and then he's going to lose the House, maybe lose the Senate.
Yeah, I think
And
it stacks up better for the blue in 2026, if I
totally
recall.
agree with you. I totally agree with you. And
Yeah.
so I think they're going to be in a big hurry. They're saying they want to shut Doge down by July 4th, 2026. We'll see. I mean, that gives them a year and a half. I mean, my view would be, to answer your question specifically, Richard, they probably won't completely shut it down. But one thing I've heard consistently, and I'm hoping this happens, is that I come from, as you know, and worked a lot with DHS, worked a lot, and I have a lot of respect for my colleagues in the federal government working on a lot of these different programs. I do think that there's a lot of confusion over who has what authorities in what agencies, FBI, CISA, NSA, DIA, CIA, what day of the week is it, what time is it now? It's like who, and you go and you find 6 different agencies doing a lot of overlap of the same things. I do think you can be a lot more efficient around cybersecurity in the federal government. I also think that whether you agree with this or not, there's a different mindset around what the private sector should be doing versus what the public sector should be doing. And I do think we need leadership in a lot of areas around regulations, around AI and around autonomous vehicles and around a lot of things. And yet Trump is saying, deregulation is going to be the game in town. So I think it's going to be one way or another. And even if you guys say it's not going to be successful, we'll see. But I think it's going to be dramatic change. And I firmly believe right now, maybe a year from now, Mike, you can tell me I'm wrong.
That's it. I'm going to keep this video, and then next
I do
December,
think you're going to see
when the whole world falls apart, then we'll have this
whether
conversation.
It's all good, whether it's good or bad is another question. But I do think it's going to continue to be the top story that we will look back at more than any specific one ransomware attack. And by the way, the article goes on to talk about, we've had increasing ransomware. We've had a number of different data breaches. I lay them out in the article. We've talked about where things are going with AI and how AI is transforming cybersecurity. Those things are in there, and they're all very important stories. I just don't think any one of them by themselves is more significant than Trump's reelection.
And I know you got to run here shortly, but what I'll do is when I post the video, I'll post a link to your article so people can read the whole thing. I know you got to run. We're at the end of your session, but Richard, stick around. There's a couple of things I want to talk about. What might likely happen in 2025.
Okay,
thank
you
guys.
Great.
Thanks, Dan. Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Take
Merry
care,
Christmas.
All right, so that is my question. What do you think are going to be the top stories for cybersecurity, of course, in 2025?
Yeah, I think we are seeing, some activity for the industry that is starting to blossom. Last half of this year, I think it'll continue into next year. So we will be back into the good times for cybersecurity, which we've been out of, right? So the good times were 2021, 22, where we had like 17 billion in investment and 24 billion in new funding for companies in one of those years. But then everything fell apart. So last year it was closer to 10 billion. And I think this year we're going to be close to 15, and next year back up into that 17, $20 billion level. And it'll be a bad scramble, right? Because while the investors and Wall Street do their thing with ups and downs, the bad guys just keep plugging away, right? They just keep.
They don't
trying to
have
make more
investors;
money.
it's just themselves, right? So
yeah, it's just themselves, and they're trying to better their lives and for them and their families by stealing money from everybody else.
yeah, I mean, $100 million goes a long ways towards bettering your life, right? That's almost the salary that Matt Roush makes.
Sure.
That's got to be split up amongst a lot of players. Right?
That's true. Yes.
When they've got these networks that work. So at any rate, so that's whenever there's a down upturn in security spending, it's made up for later, right? They call it security debt. You don't get the free pass that I got when I went into the Department of Motor Vehicle or the Secretary of State's office when I realized I hadn't renewed my license plates on my car.
Yeah, it comes on fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, so it was 3 months late. So
Oh,
they prorated the amount I owed.
really?
I drove around with, plates without stickers on them for 3 months, and I didn't have to pay for that. It was kind of like, hey, I should do that every year.
You're confessing. The Secretary of State does watch the show, and you've just confessed now. So I'm just warning you. So
well, they've changed that now, and they don't do that
okay.
anymore.
Right.
So, but anyways, you don't get that in security. If you save, $100,000 by not buying that new tool that you need for multi-factor authentication, you don't get away with that, right? You've been exposed to tremendous risk while you hadn't deployed it. If you buy it now, you're still going to have catch up and education of all your users to get them using it. You're underspent, and you gotta spend all that money eventually.
Matt?
Well, I'm just, it strikes me, going back to some of what Dan was saying. What do you think is going to be the sort of administrative changes in this incoming administration? I know a lot of it so far has just seemed like chaos. A lot of the a lot of the appointments to various positions in government seem, I'll charitably call them wacky. What do you think he's going to do with a lot of these initiatives that the Biden administration has started?
We've seen him in action. He doesn't do anything or have any thoughts himself, right? Other than immediately off the cuff stuff. Even when a tweet is well written, we all know somebody else wrote it for him. When it's thought out, it's got policy stuff in it that he wouldn't know. So that's he's just a figurehead. But he's a figurehead who is trying to disrupt things by installing his friends in key positions. We've seen what that does when he installed the head of the United States Postal Service.
Huh.
That's exactly what we're going to get. We're going to get the same dysfunction, throwing out brand new machines just because, completely mistreating the workers.
They have no joy, right? So
yeah. It's going to be, no matter what agency gets touched by a Trumpite, it's going to be a disaster.
Well, the Musk one particularly worries me. And although that Indian fella's name, how do you pronounce?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, he's another another interesting individual. So
right. Will there be a department? Probably not. Will Musk have free reign of the White House? Maybe. But, how long can those two work together? I just don't see those two.
Trump always wants to be the one focused on, and if Musk starts to steal his thunder, that probably will end that relationship.
Exactly. Or if he pulls his Trump card too often, which says, hey, I bought this election for you, back down.
Yeah, you owe me. You owe me.
Yeah, that's not going to go over well.
Matt?
Well, $250 million, goes a long way to buying a presidential election, I guess.
Yeah, that's how much a yacht costs. Come on.
Oh, okay.
That's like pocket change to a guy that's got, I've lost track of 300 billion, trillion, whatever it is. I don't know. It's huge.
Yeah, he spent $44 billion on Twitter, and it's now worth about a quarter of that. So,
well, I think that's his tax write-off. So,
okay. Yeah.
Well, I think you'll all agree with me that karma sucks, and it's coming big time for all of these people. So,
although this will be more of a political comment, I think the 2026 elections will be quite interesting because I think people just have no idea what's going to happen in the next 2 years, and it's not going to be good unless you're a billionaire, So
yeah, that's for certain.
I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to get too political on the show, but I am. Don't know what to think. I'm just keep my head down, I guess. All right, cool. Well, anyway, so, but now getting back to your thought on all the spending that's coming next year, no one can possibly do that without the security yearbook, right? Talk about that.
That's right. So, and thanks for reminding me because
Well, I thought I'd throw you a plug there. You go ahead. So,
I'm in the middle of writing Security Yearbook 2025, which will be out in the May-June timeframe. So, I have to do a year-end wrap-up. I won't say Trump's election is the most important anything, but it'll be focused on, the cybersecurity events of the year. And then I track all the M&A that's happened and all the investments that have happened. Those of us in the industry who have passed away are memorialized. It's just a great reference book. It's gonna this time this year it'll have over 4,000 security companies listed in the directory.
Wow.
and where does one acquire this? How can one possibly not purchase this book, and where can they do that?
You have to be going to Amazon to buy it, or you buy it directly from Wiley. Wiley does put it in bookstores, so you might see it at a bookstore.
And it's like what, $50, give or take?
Yeah, 54 actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you happen to? Well, you don't have a copy yet because it's still out. Show them the 2023 one just so they get reference.
Well, here's
I think the covers pretty much stay the same, right?
Yeah, there's 2024.
Oh, they're
Yeah.
good. Got it.
Oh no, the cover for 2025 is going to be vibrant green.
Vibrant green. Ooh,
Very excited. We got all crazy. Yeah,
I can't wait to see that. So,
it'll look
All
good on the
right.
shelf.
any final questions before we sign off for the year, there, Matt?
No, I think Dan and Richard covered it pretty well. I think it's just hold on to your hats. It's only going to get crazier and more interesting, which
Yeah.
is good for us news guys. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, lots of stuff to cover. So anyway, this is Matt and I's last show until January 6th. We take a break because can't book anybody anyway. Everybody else is doing what we want to do, and that's make merry for the next 2 weeks. So I encourage everyone to do that. I'm certainly going to give it my best shot. I won't speak for Matt, but I just want to say thanks for joining us this year. Be sure to join us in 2025. Matt, any final farewells to the audience?
Well, I did want to point out that I am leaving full-time employment as of December 31st. So I will be technically retired, although I'm going to continue freelancing and I'll stay involved in the journalism world. I'm still going to keep up techcentury.com for the Engineering Society and Lawrence Tech. So I'm going to stay interested and stay connected and all that good stuff. So fear not, folks. I'll be around.